Uh, our panelists today are Beth Marshall and Julie Eshelman, and I hope I said that correctly, Julie. Um, Beth, uh, I'm just going to read her short bio here. So after experiencing 7 years of infertility, she became deeply committed to supporting others on their infertility journeys. Her personal experience really fuels her passion for advocacy, connection, and creating space for healing and hope. eBeth hosts a peer-led support group, co-chairs the DIY Walk of Hope, Arizona, co-chairs Federal Advocacy Day, sits on the board of Resolve, and advocates for insurance coverage in Arizona. Professionally, she serves as the executive director in advanced fertility care in Phoenix, and her personal experience has really shaped her professional mission. So thank you so much for being here, Ebeth. And Julie is the founder, CEO, and president of Building Military Families Network, where she took her struggles and the lack of support and access to information in family building to create an organization that fills that gap for military and veteran families. Her own family's experiences with infertility and the frustrations resulting from the lack of insurance coverage and a support network really led her to advocate and launch a nonprofit for the change that she desperately wanted to see for the next generation of military and veteran families. Julie was named the 2022 Armed Forces Insurance Fort Leavenworth Spouse of the Year for her awareness, advocacy, and leadership in infertility and military family building. Thank you so much for being here, Julie. So now, Julie and Ebeth will share their fertility stories with the group to demonstrate what it can sound and look like in 5 minutes or less. Please be aware they're going to be discussing sensitive and personal stories, and it may be triggering for some individuals.
Thank you, MJ. And, thank you for, having myself and Ebeth here to, share some of the things that we've learned over the years in our advocacy. So like MJ said, my name is Julie Eshelman. I am a military spouse. And, when my husband and I got married in 2015, we, naively thought that we would just, take that first year to, enjoy, marriage or whatever it is, we thought we needed to do in that year, without the pressure of trying to build a family. But then as we started that journey, we started to realize or started to think like, hey, this isn't happening. Like, what might be going on? And nobody was talking about infertility back in 2016. Like that was still a very taboo thing. Like nobody, like you kept it secret. You didn't talk about it. And so at that point where we had hit that kind of 1 year mark, my husband's in the army and we got the word that we were going to be moving from Joint Base Lewis McChord, which is in like Tacoma, Washington, and we were going to be moving to Scottsdale, Arizona. And so right when we were, near one of the 8 military treatment facilities that has a fertility clinic where we could be seen at like a discount, um, we had to move away from that. And our doctors in Arizona were like, you really don't meet the threshold for having tried because, your husband was gone some of the time that you guys were trying in that year. And so you should try a little bit longer. And you're young because, we all love to hear that, right? And so I did that naively. I didn't know any better. I didn't know how to advocate for myself. And that 1 year, suddenly turned into 2, and then suddenly my husband was leaving for deployment. And it wasn't until he was gone that we got the referral to finally be seen and evaluated at a fertility clinic. And so while my husband was deployed, he was gone for a little over a year in total. I did all the diagnostics and, I got on the wait list, got off the wait list, did the diagnostics and did all that. And then when he returned in 2019, we hit the ground running, and did our first IUI. And then, like, days after we did the first IUI, we got news that we were moving again. And we had a short notice move. And so we were moving in 3 weeks from Scottsdale, Arizona to the Chicago suburbs. Um, and that was when we experienced our first miscarriage, was while we were driving across country. Um, and then, it takes time to establish care when you get set up in a new city. So I had to find a new primary care doctor. I had to do all the follow-up care for the miscarriage. And then had to wait and go through the referral process again at a new fertility clinic. And of course, that fertility clinic wanted to run their own diagnostics. So then I had to go through all the diagnostic testing all over again. And so at that point, it is now, I want to say August of 2019, where we finally got set up with the new clinic. And then in September that year, we were able to do a second IUI transfer. And we were successful again. And unfortunately, that resulted in a miscarriage as well. And it was around that time where we started feeling like we needed to tell people what was going on, because I had to have surgery, because I had a missed miscarriage. So I had to have surgery, and like we felt like I was going to be put under. I probably needed to tell my parents I was having surgery, and we finally had to start opening up about what was going on. And so we did that. And I feel like I haven't looked back. That opened so many doors. It opened so many conversations, because not only were people not talking about infertility, they weren't talking about miscarriages either. And so that opened the flood doors. We did a third IUI, had a third miscarriage. Um, then 2 days before we were supposed to do our fourth Hail Mary IUI, COVID shut down the world. And that was kind of how I got involved in advocacy. Was when COVID shut down everything, Resolve had to pivot their advocacy day into a virtual event. And so I took my 15 seconds of courage and I signed up for that advocacy day. I did it scared. Um, and I think it was the best thing I could have ever done, in all honesty. And that helped me pass the time while we waited for the fertility clinics to open up so that we could, start the IVF process. And so, as you can see by the photos, I do have an almost 4-year-old daughter, who is our miracle. And shortly after we had her, we moved with her at 4.5 weeks old from Chicago to Kansas, where we were for 10 months. And so we knew that, we weren't going to try for baby number two because we were only going to be in Kansas 10 months, which, as you can imagine, is not long enough to establish care at a fertility clinic and start the whole process. And so we waited until we moved to Pennsylvania, um, which, that was a whole process. It took us 10 months of going back and forth between our clinic in Pennsylvania and our clinic in Illinois to get our embryos moved. And we did an embryo transfer in October of 23. Yeah, 20. I'm losing track of time. I'm getting old. Um, and unfortunately, that resulted in a second trimester loss, that nearly killed me. And where we are now is, by the time I finally recovered from that loss, we moved again. And so now we are still kind of in limbo. Finally have most of my care now established here in Virginia, but we're not sure what we want to do. It's exhausting. It, without the insurance coverage, it is really expensive. And there aren't a lot of clinic options where we are currently either. And so there's a lot of things that like play into, do we want to drive back and forth to Pennsylvania for treatment? Do we want to go through another 10 months of moving our embryos? Do we even have the money to be able to afford to move our embryos? And so I share that, to help people understand the toll that this does take on our journeys and through the process. And so now Ebeth is going to share kind of a different way that you can tell your story.
Thanks, Julie, and thank you for sharing your story. It's always hard. So we're gonna actually watch a video of my story. It's just another way of sharing your story. So I actually did this for my work, just so we were talking about the patient experience and how do we as my job as an ED, like how do we support our patients and what they go through. And so one of those things was me sharing my story and that impact of what it meant for me to be a patient and what worked well for me as a patient. I have since shared this on my personal social media, like for my family to see, just because it's quite a journey. I will say, same as MJ has said, like there's triggers here. We've unfortunately had 7 losses. And our journey was very long, 7 years. So lots of ups and downs. And and so I think this is really great. And it also, I'll share a little bit of things after it's done, but this is a way that you can present your story without telling everyone everything, but enough to highlight. Everything that you see in here is actually screenshots from Facebook as I was going through the treatment. So the memes that are in here, ones that I've shared, the pictures are ones that I have shared. So I'll talk as we go through it, so we don't have to like watch it in silence for 3 minutes. But this is my story, and so that's my little Genevieve. So this is me and my husband when we started dating and when we got married in 2008. We had our first 2 losses from natural conception. And in 2016, we finally went to a fertility clinic and we were pregnant with our third. And unfortunately, it was our progesterone levels were too low to support it. So it started our journey to IUIs, and Operation Turkey Buster Baster was a bust. And so in 2017, we moved on to egg retrieval. That is my husband and our fertility nurse. This is our first transfer. Miscarriage number 5 was from natural conception. Here's our next transfer. And unfortunately, it didn't work. This is my favorite one about a hoarding stork. Could you pause this? So this was really far into my journey. This was in 2020, so 4 years in. And at this point, we had spent, my husband and I were cash pay. We don't have infertility coverage in Arizona. And at this point, we had basically, this was like our stopping point. Although clearly we moved on because, and we restarted again. But this was like our breaking point. And so what this is IVF doesn't always mean a baby. There should be a cute baby and an ultrasound picture with cute booties to announce that that a baby is coming. And so in here, it also talks about no one prepares you for the grief and the depression that comes with infertility, and the feeling as a failure as a woman, and a failure as a wife. And this was probably one of my most meaningful posts. And I was very surprised by the reactions that I got because I don't think people understand that toll that infertility has on you. Okay, thanks for pausing it. Oh no, I'm sorry about that. There we go. So then we went to a reproductive immunologist to kind of see why we kept having losses. And so I had natural mother killer cells. And so there was an issue reasoning for our miscarriages. We did start an adoption process, and our birth mom chose to parent. And so that was another incredibly difficult part of our journey. And then my sister passed away in 2020, and we got custody of her two kids. So we call this their gotcha day when we officially became their guardians. And then my sister Stephanie decided to carry for us, and that was wonderful. I had my seventh miscarriage shortly after that. And unfortunately, I had a reaction to some medication and I had a pulmonary embolism and a blood clot in my right calf. Um, and thankfully, my sister was already in process, so we moved right along. My sister did have a miscarriage that turned into our eighth miscarriage. And then we had a second transfer with my sister, and that one failed to implant. So we changed fertility clinics. We moved to a different state with our fertility clinics, and we did our third transfer with ORM in Portland. And we now have our little Genevieve. Genevieve Elizabeth Marshall was born on March 18th, 2023. And we're incredibly thankful to Dr. Hurleman and Pinnacle Fertility, where we have our miracle. So this is my story, and what you guys can see is, this talks about my journey. Aside from that, I was in public accounting for 20 years, and after my third miscarriage, I started advocating on the state level. I've had 3 bills introduced at the state legislature to mandate insurances cover infertility in Arizona. Um, and I got really involved with Resolve. So in 2016, advocating on the federal level. I'm sorry, on the state level. And then I started a support group in 2017, and then doing walks and all of these things. So my story doesn't really talk about the advocacy side. And then shortly after Genevieve was born, I made the change from public accounting to become an executive director. Beth, who's the CEO of Pinnacle Fertility, reached out to me and said, "Your whole life is in, fertility. Why isn't your career?" And she was absolutely right. I don't know why it wasn't. And so it was fantastic. And I don't look back. And I'm incredibly thankful to be still in this community, but in a different way. But what's not in my story, something that I don't really talk about openly, well, I do talk about it openly, but not outwardly, is Genevieve is donor conceived. And I just feel that that's Genevieve's decision to share to the world when she's ready. So we'll raise her and share that with her. And when she wants to tell people, that's hers. But that's something that we chose as a couple. But as you can see, we've left that out of our story. So your story doesn't have to be every little piece that has happened. It can be pieces of it. And that is okay. And it's all super meaningful either way you do it. So that's my story.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you, Julie, so much for sharing these deeply personal and emotional stories with us. Um, it takes an incredible amount of courage to be able to share that information with people. And so I would imagine that many are could be uncomfortable or scared to share their story. And so my first question to you would be, what led you to start opening up and sharing your experience?
I think for me, I think I was so frustrated by the fact that TRICARE, which is the insurance for the military, doesn't provide coverage for IUI or IVF unless the service member has a service related injury or illness. So it doesn't matter if you have the disease of infertility or, have any of these other contributing factors like PCOS or endometriosis, that we have to pay for that treatment and that care out of pocket. And my husband and I were sacrificing like everything. And we gave up having a second car, we stopped going on vacations, we gave up date nights, like we cut out everything so that we could pay for that. And while we would do that again, it got to this frustration point. And then COVID happened, and then it was like everything stopped and like we couldn't do anything. And it was just like it was my breaking point. And I knew I needed to do something. And saying something and sharing that experience was something I could do. It was an action that I could take. And so that's kind of why I started sharing and how I got to where I am today.
Yeah, similar to Julie. Um, to put it plainly, I was pissed, like I just was. It was crazy to me after our third miscarriage. We finally had a diagnosis. I was born with half of a uterus. My left half never developed. And then I had a progesterone deficiency and PCOS. So there was a medical reasoning for why I was having infertility. And it was crazy to me that my insurance still said that the treatment necessary not to have another miscarriage was cosmetic. And I honestly was stunned by it. And I was stunned by how many people also didn't know that either. Like I had no idea what an insurance mandate meant and that infertility was considered cosmetic. And my insurance covered everything for miscarriage, but nothing to prevent another one from happening. And that was just so crazy to me. And that's where it really started. For 6 months straight, I wrote every single Arizona legislator until I finally got a response back. And then as I was doing that, I realized that in my private life, people started asking questions like, why haven't we started having a family? And I was constantly beating around that bush. And so then I just thought, it's time to share. It's time to share what we're going through and then also what battles we have. And I mean, I think that we can all agree we always get the not so helpful hints or advice, and that people really aren't educated on infertility and how it impacts us and what's necessary and what the medical treatments are and all of those things. And so that's what really led me to start sharing was I can't be the only one going through this. And I also found, and this is incredibly difficult to talk about, but I also found that my support that I had wasn't enough because they hadn't gone through it. And not that you have to go through something to be empathetic, but it's almost like you need somebody to help guide you through it. And I thought by sharing, and sure enough, as soon as I started sharing, I got a new support system of people that had gone through it and then could tell me what they went through. And I'm forever thankful for that.
Thank you guys so much. And so I guess my next question would be, how can you how do you share your story and raise awareness in general? And also in what capacities have you shared your story in the past?
Yeah, for me, when we had experienced that second miscarriage and we started to open up, we had experienced that loss, in October, and it was, Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month. And so a really it was a really easy step to make. There's this holiday that people are celebrating. Maybe it's not a lot of people, but it was an opportunity that was easy to do because like, hey, it's a holiday. It's like in, Pregnancy and Infant Loss Baby Remembrance Day, and I could light my candle for like the wave of light, and I'm participating in something that other people are participating in. So it wasn't as scary to jump in and join alongside something that was already in existence. And then, from there, it just got a little bit easier. We started sharing, when we were making that decision to do IVF, and started sharing and opening up. And then, I talked about how I got involved with Advocacy Day. And so that led me to, this space where, now I'm talking about my story, but like I'm sharing about the things that I need Congress to change. And so like I'm able to take that story and say, well, if you were to pass this law, that would make it so much easier for people like me that have experienced this problem. And so it was just naturally, I kept doing different things and sharing in different ways. And then, I've had the media interviews, I've had the opportunity to write my infertility memoir. And so there's so many different ways that you can tell your story. You could tell your story through video, through art, through whatever way you're inspired to share. And I feel like that's something that's so beautiful about, raising awareness and advocacy, is that there's not just one way to do it. And so you can find that, you know, flavor of the month, if you will, in how you want to tell your story. Um, and it's special. And I know Ebeth has done, some other ways in sharing her story. Like you're blank.
Yeah.
It's like you're
I'm sure my husband at this point is like, can we just stop talking about it? But and it's like Julie says, like we share in other ways. Like I've never, thank you, Christy. I appreciate that. Um, no, but same as Julie, like advocating, whether it's federal or state, or just talking about it in support group or sharing on social media, even talking about in our workplace. And so much so that like we become, I think because we've gone through it, we know how sensitive we are. So we talk about it like and how we support our employees that might be going through something similar. And how do we make sure that we don't have triggering things, even though we're a fertility clinic, but like how certain things could trigger an employee, even if they're not actively having an infertility diagnosis, but they might have a loss on their own or something like that. So I just find that you share in any capacity, and it's amazing how many strangers you meet on an airplane or at a restaurant or something else where they're just asking about your daughter. And my husband and I are a little bit older, and why did you wait longer? And then that you take those moments, like when people make comments. I used to get really upset, and now I take those moments to answer those questions like, why did you wait so long in life? Well, we didn't wait. We tried for 12 years. And that's an honest answer. And even in those answers, that's sharing your story and also bringing awareness to other people. If they're willing to ask, they have to be willing to hear that answer, even if it is a little uncomfortable.
I love that. Thank you so much, both of you. And like I said earlier, it takes a lot of courage. And so I'm wondering, what advice do you have for someone who is hesitant or uncertain about sharing their story?
you know, being nervous, being hesitant about sharing something so vulnerable and personal, that's normal. I there are times where I still am uncertain, or I'm nervous, or I'm like, do I want to share about that today? And you just have to read the room, but also read how you're feeling. Like if you were feeling really emotional, or, you don't really want to get into a certain part of your story that day, you don't have to. You can share how much or how little. And as you tell your story more, you're going to get more comfortable with it. I mean, Ebeth and I did not start out talking this confidently. I mean, Ebeth and I were, I think, in some of our first federal advocacy days together because we're both in Arizona. Um, and we get better every year. We were definitely not perfect the first few years, and I'm still not perfect. And so it's your story, and nobody else can take that away from you. And that's, you have to hold on to that as like your strength in this, because your story is yours. My story is mine, Ebeth's is Ebeth's. What's that's what makes us so special. And so even if you're hesitant, you're scared, or you're uncertain, you just need to find and ground yourself in that you are the expert of your own story. So, Ebeth, I'm sure you have
No,
similar advice.
no, I mean, that's great advice. And no, and it's true. And you're going to be vulnerable. And if you cry, that is okay. But if you're hesitant, that's okay. Like we all are that way. My in 2017, I had a story in the Arizona Central. That's like our largest newspaper here in Arizona. And it was about my struggle, and it was about the bill that got introduced, and about why there needs to be. And there's just people that are keyboard warriors, and there's nothing you can do about it. And I still remember to this day, and it still makes me cry a little bit, that this guy responded to this story that says, maybe God's trying to tell her something.
Mm.
And that's like the things that kind of like live rent free in your head. And that's what makes people hesitant about sharing their story, is what other people are going to take back from that. But honestly, they can never take your story away from you. So what you're going through is real, what you're going through is legitimate, and and there needs to be change. And sometimes it doesn't help in the moment when there's like a horrible comment that's made, but you have support in your family, you have support from other people and organizations, from Resolve, and from these people, from everyone on this call. So I know that that doesn't always take away that hesitation, but
Mhm.
you can't live in fear that someone might be mean, because some people just are, and that's unfortunate. But your story is going to help somebody else. The reason that I share so much, and we talked about this actually this advocacy day, the reason that I share, why I share, is because I watched somebody else share. And because they shared, it inspired me. So by you sharing your story, you're going to inspire somebody else. Somebody else is going to go, oh my gosh, I am not the only one going through this. I'm not alone in this journey, and there is somebody else going through this. And so just know that your story is inspiring somebody else, and it is going to inspire change. And whatever that change is, you might not be able to measure it, but it's there and it's real.
And you're also using your voice for those that can't use their voice too.
Yeah.
Like that should be something that is there to encourage you, that when you're having those moments of hesitation, that this is bigger than just us as individuals.
Absolutely. Um, I think you both make such great points. This is such important work that you are doing. And I think about, you know, just like all of us, we're not necessarily public speakers or storytellers, in our day-to-day lives. And so my question is, how do you craft your story for a big impact? Like if you want to change someone's mind, or if you want to just like help someone to understand your perspective or your point of view, right? How do you how do you craft that story in a way that's going to have that really big impact?
So one of the things that I like to look at, when I'm going to meet with like my representative, for instance, when I know I'm getting ready to meet with my representative, whether I'm doing it for advocacy day or I'm doing it when I'm in DC for my military conference every year, I look at the parts of my story that resonate for the military families, that I'm representing, but also that resonate with other things, and other challenges. So for my story, I've moved 5 times in the last 7 years. And every time we move, we have to reestablish care. And so that adds, on average, 6 to 12 months of delays when I'm trying to seek care. And when you're trying to build your family, people can have a baby in that time. And so, that so like I try to find parts of my story that will be able to leave an impact, and it's something that is tangible for who I'm speaking with to understand. So 5 moves in 7 years, that adds on average 6 to 12 months of delays. That is something that they can tangibly understand, but they can also understand the challenges. For military families, when they're moving that frequently, Congress already knows that they're seeing out of pocket expenses related to those moves. So I try to tag, my issue to these other issues that I know they're working on actively. Another issue that I a lot of times will tie my story in to is military spouse unemployment. And so I'm trying to link it to other things that they're working on, other things that they might be passionate on, especially when I'm meeting with representatives that are maybe not as historically supportive of family building issues, but I know that they're passionate about military issues. And so knowing who my audience is helps me craft that story to make sure that it's going to have that impact. And so picking like 3 parts of your story that you would want to highlight on that are going to be those big impacts. Because for a lot of us, our journeys are so long. Like they can span a decade sometimes. And so it's finding those highlights, if that makes sense.
No, Julie, you're absolutely right. It's all about finding those highlights. And also when you're deciding like what's that big impact, it's what the big impact is to you and
Mhm.
your family and what you're feeling and what you're going through. And so like one thing that I talk about, like, and Julie's right, like if you're advocating, you look to see what they sponsored or like what they're against and different things like that. So like for my story, after our 7th miscarriage, it was from a natural conception. I actually had to get a hysterectomy. And so I share the fact that my insurance covered the cost to recover me from each of my miscarriages, including a hysterectomy. But had they just covered the cost of fertility treatment, would I had to have had a hysterectomy in the first place? And that's what I generally leave with because that makes them think about it. But there's different things. There's facts. Like if you go to resolve.org, I know that this organization, also Colorado Infertility Advocates, you guys have your facts. So sharing those facts are also very important. But really, when you're talking about your big impact, it's about what's impacting your family. So whether that's out of pocket costs, not having insurance coverage, or moving, or whatever that is, or the lack of resources that you have, or the lack of care, whatever those are what you want to focus on in your story and making that big impact and how it's impacting your family and your life.
Thank you so much. Um, okay, so that kind of leads me into my next question. Um, how do you craft your story based on who you're talking to?
I mean, a lot of times it's going to come down to what bills they've supported in the past. Like when I'm talking to, members of Congress or their staff, I'm looking at what those offices have supported and sponsored and what they haven't. And, if they are normally supportive of these issues, I'm able to maybe focus a little bit more on the personal impacts that infertility has had, or that the lack of access to insurance coverage has had, versus when I'm talking to an audience, or to a staffer or an audience that maybe isn't as supportive of the issue. I'm going to try and give them, I want to give them a little bit of that personal story and that personal touch, but I'm also going to probably talk a little bit more numbers with them because they're going to want to know, well, what does it really come down to? Um, and I mean, I think that's my biggest advice as far as like knowing your audience and how I would do my story differently. But there's also, if I'm doing my story, am I doing my story for members of Congress or am I doing this for the media? Because if I'm talking to the media, they don't want to know the numbers as much. They want to know that human interest, that personal, like what were the sacrifices? What did my husband and I give up? How many times did we move? Because they love that. And so it's kind of reading and kind of getting to know who your audience is and what they want. And a lot of that will come down to the more you're doing this and the questions you get are going to help you be able to craft that for that audience better.
Yeah. So Ebeth, just based on time, I'm gonna
Yeah.
pass the next question to you,
Okay.
that I think really aligns with what we were just talking about. With
Yeah.
different audiences, you're gonna have people who, have a lot of empathy, and then you're gonna have a lot of people who, maybe are very judgmental or have a lot of personal opinions about it. So how do you prepare yourself for that?
Yeah, I wish I could say it gets easy, right? It doesn't. So you just part of it is crafting your story in a way that you know what you want to get from people. So like one of your audiences could actually be your work, right? How do you tell your work you're going through infertility? And the thing is that if you go in telling them saying, "Hey, I need to tell you something personal. I'm not coming here to tell you that I need time off of work or that I need this or I need that. I'm coming to tell you so you can understand why my schedule might change suddenly and I need to have that understanding that if I tell you I need to change my schedule for an appointment, this is why." And so sometimes it's just laying out why you're sharing your story to set yourself up so you don't get the unsolicited advice back. But we generally get that from family members that are trying to be helpful. We all know that anything that just starts with a just, please don't say it. Just relax, just adopt, just whatever. It's never, if it starts with a just, it's almost like you could say, could you just not say it? Um, and so the thing is that as you get used to sharing your story, you will also get used to responding to those kinds of messages back. And it's also education for that person. So even in those responses, like when someone does say, just relax, you can say, it's not a matter of relaxing. It's a matter of not receiving proper medical treatment for my medical diagnosis, if that is the reason for your infertility, right? So it's just you just got to be prepared that that is a potential. The nice thing is that Facebook, you can turn off comments. On Instagram, you can turn off comments, so you can share your story without getting those comments. And if somebody privately DMs you, then you can decide how to handle that. And so I wish there was some trick for it, but there's really not, except for knowing that sometimes feedback will be it will be someone's personal opinion or or unsolicited advice. So just know that that does come with sharing, but there's ways of protecting yourself from it as well. And even when you're sharing your story, you can even say, please know my husband and I, or my spouse and I, or my partner, or yourself, right? Please know that I'm doing what I need to do, and thank you for your thoughts, but no further information is needed or input is needed. You can always, there's a better way of putting that than what I'm saying right now,
Set
a much
boundaries.
better way. But you can basically at the end of the email just say, or the message, like, I'm not looking for feedback. I'm not looking for solutions. Like, I just want you to be aware. Like, FYI.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So we have just a couple minutes left, and I would really love in to hear, like, earlier you told your stories in 5 minutes, and I would love to hear, what does it sound like to do that, like, elevator pitch 30-second fertility story, because these are heartfelt, gut-wrenching experiences. How on earth do you minimize it to just 30 seconds, right? But it can be really beneficial, right, when we're kind of maybe in the space of advocacy or awareness building.
All
So,
right.
yeah,
Yeah.
Julie, go ahead and show us how it's done.
All right. So hi, my name is Julie Eshelman. I am a military spouse, and I have spent the last 9 years dealing with infertility. And during that time, my husband and I have moved 5 times in the last 7 years, and we've undergone fertility treatments in 3 different states at 3 different clinics. During that time, we have experienced 4 losses, one while we were moving all the way across the country. And during that time, I gave birth to my daughter following our first IVF cycle. And so I do have my little miracle, but she wasn't the only one we wanted to have. We wanted to have more, children. And because of our frequent moves and my recurrent miscarriages, that has become a struggle for my husband and I. And after, over $80,000, we're not sure that we can pursue building our family any further.
That's perfect. So Julie's was more like for, talking about legislators and things like that. So I'm going to share my story just like as a different way of sharing my story in 30 seconds without it being motivated towards like lack of coverage or anything like that. So hi, I'm Ebeth. I am from Phoenix, Arizona. We've had a long fertility journey, and in that time frame, we did treatments for 7 years. Unfortunately, we had 7 losses, and I wasn't able to carry. And my sister was our surrogate, and we welcomed our daughter Genevieve in 2023. And for us, fertility was devastating. We gave up multiple times, and then we always had that what if rumbling in the back of our head, and so we continued. We're incredibly grateful, but we faced a lot of hurdles, and especially the biggest one for us was not having insurance and being cash pay for everything. And so for us, that impacted us greatly.
Thank you guys so much. Very, very impressive. To be able to, because we all heard your stories earlier, so thank you so much for sharing in that format. Um, so I want to move on and open the door for open Q&A. Are there any questions from the audience that we didn't cover during our kind of formal Q&A?
There was nothing in the chat that popped up. So I think if there's any additional questions, um, maybe during the how do we get involved, we can learn how we can reach out and email to you directly, if that's okay.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much. So then just want to wrap up with just some of the key takeaways or insights from our time together. Um, so Julie, if you want to just kind of quickly summarize, Julie and Yvette, quickly summarize that for us.
Yeah, the number one thing, we want you to really remember is that nobody can take away your story. That, your story is yours and it's yours to tell. Um, and it also doesn't have to be perfect. Ebeth and I stumble on our words all the time. We say the wrong things. Like, we're human. And you're always going to be talking to another human who's going to understand that. Whether you're talking to a reporter or you're talking to a staffer, they are still a person. And so we're not perfect. We're not meant to be perfect. Your story doesn't have to be either.
Yeah. And the biggest thing is it's your story. And that's what matters the most. And never, ever underestimate the power of your voice. We talk about a lot in Federal Advocacy Day that just being there gets us a seat at the table. And so the thing is that, just don't ever underestimate that. Like for Federal Advocacy Day, for us to be able to register in a Congress is, is, I'm so sorry, my boss just walked in. I'm so sorry, guys. But basically, like for Federal Advocacy Day, though, for us to be able to request a meeting, we have to have your mailing address. And then that gets us that seat at the table. So by you being willing to join for Federal Advocacy Day, that lets your story and your voice be heard. And for us to bring that attention to your representative. So never, ever underestimate the power of your story.
Yeah.
Thank you both so much. That's super helpful. So I guess I would love, after talking through all of this, I'd love to hear a little bit about how to get involved. For those of us who are ready to share our stories and go in maybe an advocacy route. What does that look like for each of these organizations?
Yeah. So my organization, Building Military Families Network, we really are striving to create an empowering and supportive network for military and veteran families that are navigating the challenges and struggles that they have, because of infertility, um, while they're building their families. And so we do that through our support groups, through education, resources, and then kind of that advocacy side of things. And so, we partner with organizations like Resolve to participate in that advocacy. But we also are doing our annual survey every year that is providing valuable information, to legislators and lawmakers um, to do all that. And so, you guys, if you want to learn more, you can check out our website. If you want to contact me, my email, it's just julie@buildingmilitaryfamiliesnetwork.org. I know it's a really long email address, but the acronym was taken. so, so we're stuck with. And then Ebeth, you let me know if you want me to add any more about Advocacy Day when you're talking about Resolve.
Okay.
So Christy, our board chair,
Hi.
is going to chime in about CFA.
This was such a great conversation. Thank you so much, Ebeth and Julie, for being so vulnerable and sharing your story. And I feel like that's a big takeaway too, is that it never gets easier, right, to share your story, because these are personal stories. But hearing your guys' story makes me. I mean, there's so many times I was like, I wanted to go out, touch you guys and hug you, be like, oh, something similar. I just think it's like human nature. So it is really about all of us trying to find our way through this together. That connection point is super important, and that's why I love being part of Colorado Fertility Advocates. I have a story as well, and it led me to becoming an advocate, and now I am chair of this volunteer board. And really, that's our goal, is to not only just ensure every Coloradan has access to fertility care and to build their families the way they would like, but to share that and to raise that awareness and to create those connections to other groups as well. So we don't offer support groups, but Resolve does. If we don't have a person on our board that can help, we know people who can. So that connection point, we're just really kind of hoping people will find us, reach out to us, and then we can make those connections. And this webinar is a great example. We have our website, which is coloradofertilityadvocates.org. It's just updated. I was updating it a ton this last month or so with lots of great information. We have a list of podcasts to listen to and news articles. We're trying to do some more e-blasts. So I really, say please go visit that and sign up for our e-blast. We're also always looking for donations. We're a volunteer board, and so we try to use our donations to do other events like this, or to support just different work and we will sponsor events from our partners. So this is a free event, but you have voluntary donations at $25 when we do events like that. Really appreciate if anybody on the call or listening to this would be willing to drop some dollars our way so we can keep moving along. And yeah, the biggest thing that we're doing right now besides these events is we're really advocating for the passage of HB 1259, which is a bill in Colorado to help protect access to fertility care. We have a lot of information on our website about that, and so that's one thing that you guys will hear a lot about from us.
So this is actually where I work, Advanced Fertility Care. We're part of the Pinnacle Fertility Network. So we have clinics all over the US. We have 9 in total. And so we set the standard in fertility care, offering the most comprehensive and personalized services utilizing advanced processes, technology, and creating an inclusive environment in which people want to work. And so it's great that my job allows me to also do advocacy as part of it, which I'm so thankful for. And so ways that you can get involved is by attending Federal Advocacy Day. That's May 20th. You can go to resolve.org and register. Right now, we have all 49 states. We are missing Wyoming. So if anybody knows anyone in Wyoming, please have them sign up because we will have all 50 states and the District of Columbia is representative, which is like amazing. And then right now there's I think Julie, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like over 600 people are registered right now.
Yes,
Um,
over
yeah.
600 people and close to 300 congressional districts, I think.
Yes. And so, which is more congressional districts than we've had in any year past, which is fantastic. So please attend Federal Advocacy Day. It's a great day, a great way. And it's also a great way to dip your toes in if you're unsure. Because the nice thing about Federal Advocacy Day is it comes with a script. And you get a chance to share your story if you want to share your story. You can just join the meetings and be a part of them, but not actually share your story. And you can see other people sharing their stories while you build that confidence. So it is a great way to just kind of figure out if it's for you or not. You can email your state representatives to talk about how infertility impacted you and your family, and what that means to have that. And then you can engage with support groups and community walks. Both of those are listed on Resolve's website. For the DIY do it yourself walks, and then for their support groups.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ebeth.
Yeah.
And we'll let you talk a little bit more about Resolve as well.
Yeah. So I'm a board member of Resolve, and Judith, who's on this call, I'm going to call her out too. She's also a board member on Resolve. And so oh gosh, I've been a board member since 2022. In 2021, I received a Hope Award for service from Resolve, which was great. But Resolve's mission is they're the National Infertility Association. It's dedicated to ensuring that all people challenged in their family building journey reach a resolution through being empowered by knowledge, supported by community, and united by advocacy and inspired to act. So there's ways to get involved. Federal Advocacy Day, that is a Resolve event. And it's partnered with ASRM. So there is a link here to register now, and you can learn more there at resolve.org. But it's really a great organization to help everybody as they're going through their family building journey.
Thank you so much, Ebeth.
No, thank you guys. Thank you. Thank you for having this event. This is absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Yes.
Appreciate you guys being here, and I'm sure we'll connect again, and our paths will cross. And yeah, thanks to everybody who joined. Thanks to everybody who's watching this virtually and after the fact. And we just appreciate every story, and happy NIAW Week 2025.
And I just want to say thank you, Julie and Ebeth, for your openness and your vulnerability and your courage and willingness to engage in such a personal, important topic. You're both truly inspiring. And I really hope today's discussion has provided some valuable insights and encouragement for others. And just want to say, remember that your story has so much power to make a difference. It doesn't have to be perfect. And most importantly, it's yours. No one can take it away from you. Thank you so much.